Welcome back to Recipod. Today we'll talk about de-risking science startup. Science doesn't allow quick pivots or shortcuts. It demands data, time, and bold decisions. So how do founders move faster, save capital, and stay fundable? In this episode, we show how CRDMOs de-risk science while speeding up validation, enabling asset-light scale, and building investor-ready proof. This is De-risking Science Startups, how CRDMOs accelerate fundability and scale.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Recipod. Today, we have with us Dr. Jagdish Tampi, who is our strategic advisor and also a science-based startup founder. Sir, it is a great honor to have you with us. And thank you very much for taking the time out and also looking forward to learning a lot of things from you.
Hi, Abhishek, and I thank CRTI for giving this opportunity to share some of my views on how startups can leverage the immense capability available with CRDMO ecosystem, and some of the topics which I cover, I'm sure, will be interesting to a lot of science-based startup.
Great, sir. Sir, without wasting a lot of time, jumping right into the question, we're all aware of a lot of digital startups. But then the fundamental challenges of a science-based startup is very different to that of our tech startups that we know of. So if you can just let us know what are the challenges that they face and we're not really aware of those.
That's a fantastic question to begin with, because there are fundamental differences or structural differences between a science-based startup and a digital startup. If you look at the regulatory framework, the regulatory uncertainty, or the failure, the cost of failure, those are all completely different. Like when chemistry, biology, or material science comes, those startups cannot pivot overnight, unlike a software-based startup. And hence, the early decision making around resource allocation, experimentation, and the deployment of funds are extremely crucial for a science-based startup, unlike a digital startups which are very agile. They can take decisions on the go. That's not possible when science is involved.
So it's great how you touched upon the complexities of a science-based startup. So from your experience, what do you think are the mistakes that generally a science-based startup would make early on in their, when they start? So
yeah, that's yet another interesting or very important question. I can think of a few to name some of them. Over spending or spending on infrastructure itself too early is one of the mistakes I have seen science-based startups do. They spend a lot of money on the infrastructure too early, which is actually not required at that point in time. If you look at second thing is over spending on access to a very niche talent pool. Those are also not required at that point in time. If you look at the available opportunities or the outsourcing, space. Another thing is that being a science-based startup, many times these startups do have a tendency to generate data which are too fundamental, or I would say which are too academic, and burn a lot of cash around that. Investors actually look for ideas which are more practical, more fundable. So these are some of the three common mistakes I think a science-based startup should avoid in order to sustain their runway and not to weaken their fundability.
Sir, I think that touches upon all the mistakes that could possibly happen, and I think from your experience, you might have seen it yourself as well. So, just building on that,
Yeah.
How do you think this exposure to external capability and capacity is going to change the equation for a startup?
fundamentally, access to CRDMO or external capacity and capability makes a science-based startup or move or enable a science-based startup to move from a very asset-heavy, capex-driven, slow-moving engine to an asset-light, opex-driven execution engine. This is what actually happens when they start availing external capabilities. So now the founders can focus more on experimentation, converting idea to POC, even to prototypes and minimum viable products in a very quick way. So this is very important, because what happens is that when this kind of enablement happens, the founders can experiment or ideate very quickly. It is very important. This speed is very important for validating early ideas and take it up further.
And also, I think investors also would like speed.
Yeah. Actually, very interesting point. It's not only ideating or validating the POC. Actually, it becomes a very important, narrative to investors, or it helps them to build a, storytelling to investors.
That's wonderful, sir. Great, you touched upon how, suddenly founders have access to a lot of things.
Yeah.
But then also, I feel it brings in a little complexity or, a doubt where founders may feel they're losing control on their own things, on their ideas when they are outsourcing things to a CRDMO or an external agency.
Yeah, actually, that is because, it's how you look at. It basically comes from the mindset that the externalized facilities are, just vendors. They are not actually. The science-based startups should look at them as, collaboration partners or their acceleration partners. That's how it should be looked, rather than the traditional way of looking an external collaborator as a vendor. They can create IP much faster than internal capabilities. And also, what happens is that if you want to pivot, the kind of flexibility you look for, you don't get it in the internal capacity or capability, because you can't add facility or you cannot inject talents overnight. But the outsourcing companies, they thrive on this model. That's what they can bring in. They can bring in overnight expertise, overnight capabilities, overnight capacities. So rather than looking at on the what you call the challenges associated with the IP protection, look at the outsourced facilities as your IP generation engines.
Oh, that's a wonderful way to look at it. So this sounds very exciting. But then founders feel outsourcing means some level of losing control. So what is your thoughts on that?
By control, did you mean that it is the IP aspects or ownership of the data, ownership of the IP asset? Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly on those lines.
Yeah, that actually comes from, the outdated outsourcing models. Like when the startups look at the outsourcing partner as a vendor. But modern CRDMOs don't work like that. They are actually, work as embedded partners in your process flow. In fact, the founders can look at the outsourcing partner as their most valued IP generation partners. So what actually happens is that the founders get access to validated execution models, regulatory expertise, and quality systems, battle tested execution framework. All those things are easily available from an external partner. And that gives more control to founders to own the IP, or in fact, control the IP assets and focus more on generating ideas and validity. Yeah.
All right, sir. This gives a whole new perspective shift on outsourcing
Yeah.
in itself. Maybe startups can really look at outsourcing and the OpEx-driven model is
Correct.
something very
Yeah.
useful for them.
Right.
Great, sir. So, sir, also looks like an unfair advantage over other startups which do not outsource to compared to a startup that outsources. So, from your perspective, how do you think that is going to help them move faster or achieve their goals and milestones faster by partnering with the CRDMO?
Yeah, that's true. The science-based startups, those who outsource or externalize some of their requirements early on, they definitely have an unfair advantage because the experiments early on what they require can be done much faster at the externalized facility, and also the experiments will be able to answer the idea or the question around the idea early on. For example, is it fundable? Is it idea worth to look at? Is it defensible? Are there IP generation opportunities around this idea? All those things can be tested very early on. So this access, what happens is that makes these startups very fundable very early on. And they can in fact do the entire idea to POC or even to MVP under one funding cycle, because the funds deployment or the expense management is much more efficient when you externalize, and that makes them the startups quickly make it eligible for further funding round. For example, from seed round, they can go to a pre-series A or a series A very, very quickly compared to those who don't understand the value of externalization.
Right. So when talking about these seeding rounds and the investor rounds, you also suggested about the MVP and everything.
Correct.
So with the CRDMO, can we also test scalability on the earlier stage?
Absolutely. That is one of the biggest advantage of externalizing. Like you think of a situation, you try to do it internally.
Mhm.
So to scale up from a POC to the next stage, in a scenario where externalized capabilities are not there, you will go and set up your own infrastructure. You will go and hire a specialized niche capability. Now, when you see that you need to pivot, you can't do that that easily. But with a externalized facility, you can do that very quickly.
Looks like CRDMO adds a lot of agility to a startup.
Absolutely. Not only agility, it is basically the access to lot of expertise which you don't have internally also. For example, I touched upon the regulatory quality and the scientific expertise itself.
As we're speaking about the funding rounds like the seed or pre-seed or a pre-A or A, and you're also suggesting that they're able to help the startups reach those funding stages. Are you able to touch upon briefly as to how they are also helping startups utilize these funds?
Yeah, this is perhaps one of the most important aspect a science-based startup to consider for externalization rather than internalization. If you look at when you outsource or externalize your activity, scientific activity, what actually happens is that you are converting your capex to a variable milestone-based OpEx. You are not spending upfront, and also you are spending only when your experiments are running or only when your experiments are yielding results, right? This is not possible when you invest and do the experiments. So this is one of the important aspect, and it helps the startups in multiple ways. A couple of them I can tell you is that one is financial discipline. You have better financial discipline, and then more runway efficiency, and then more investor friendly, or investors value this kind of discipline, or this kind of very prudent utilization of your capital. Remember, early on in the journey of a startup, every rupee counts. Every dollar is important. You have to maximize out of whatever you have. That's when you become more fundable, right? This is one of the greatest value addition an externalized facility can bring in.
Some very important things you touched upon, the investor confidence and the runway also for innovation. When we talk about innovation, there's always risk associated with it.
Yeah.
And also coming to touch upon the topic of our, the topic of our discussion, de-risking the whole challenges that a startup has. How does a CRDMO, essentially support a startup in de-risking their capital or the funds that they have?
Yeah. So if you look at in scientific research, experimental risk is always there. Not every experiment will give you a result. That's always there. But then if you look at de-risking, is failing early, cost consciously, and intelligently. It's very important to understand this. So an externalized facility or a CRDMO can help the startups to, as I mentioned, experiment early on. And if the idea has to fail, or if an experiment has to fail, it will happen more cost efficiently and intelligently. This is how the startups can manage their risk through externalization. Yeah.
And also, I've heard that CROs have a lot of expertise, and they can also suggest that this could be a roadblock or this could be your end, and they would also suggest you a better routes to achieve results that you're looking at as a startup.
That's correct. Most of the CRDMOs, they have been there, done that. But for a science-based startup, this could be first time. So there is where their expertise of having been there and done that comes very handy for a science-based startup. They can bring in a altogether new perspective, their expertise around regulatory aspects, design experiments which are statistically very sound, or the expertise around science. And if something needs to be corrected, or some decision needs to be taken on the scientific aspects, the externalized facility can much faster than internal facilities.
Sounds very advantageous.
Yeah.
So we were touching upon how the risk part is, removed. Also, initially you mentioned the capex versus opex.
Yes. Yeah.
Something very exciting, and something I am very recently familiar with.
Right.
So how does capex versus opex, this whole decision of a startup, give a new perspective to an investor when they go to pitch to them about their scientific idea?
Okay, so your question is basically, how do investors look at the strategy of externalization on a
like
fund
capex.
utilization? Yeah.
Oh,
So if you look at investors often prefer startups which are asset light on early on. If a startup is not spending too much on the capex or asset light early on in that journey, so the investors understand that the founders are very prudent. They know where to invest and how to invest. That financial discipline is a very important asset for the founders. Or this is one of the aspects the investors look at, because the investors now understand that every dollar this startup spends is towards generating a valuable data. And as you know that, data is money, IP is your asset. And founders who understand that building infrastructure is not the real asset, building data sets or building IP assets, that's a real asset. Those startups will go a long way, and investors understand this very well.
Great, sir. So, like startups with more data and more, like the IP part, which will support their journey ahead.
Correct.
You say they have a higher, percentage of backing from an investor for their next round.
Yes, and that's true. But on that data part, I can elaborate a little bit. If a startup tries to do that internally, if you want to scale up the data generation, you need two things essentially. You need infrastructure, lab with equipment. You need more scientific talents. Otherwise, you can't generate more data.
Mm-hmm.
So that scalability is faster. It could be, 10x if you go to an externalized facility. And as you generate more data, you get more confident, and that leads to IP creation. Then the investors funding also will happen. So this is the real value addition of accessing external capability. This flexibility, this variability of the fund utilization, this velocity, execution velocity, these are the real differentiators.
Right, sir. A lot of new things for me, new terms. Thank you very much. So we were talking about priorities, that is IP and data sets. So regarding IP, so two questions here.
Yeah.
Can partnership with a CRDMO make it faster for a startup to reach their IP, or get enough information for an IP? And the follow-up is, if so, how does it happen?
Absolutely. Speed to IP is often underestimated. The externalized facility can help to generate IP much faster in many ways. Generate more defensible data sets that allows the startups to file more patents quickly, and also claims which can be defended later, because the IP, the art of IP generation is at the core of the externalized facility, externalized partner, because at the get-go itself, the most CRDMOs assign the IP rights to the clients. So there is no need to worry about the IP assets. Rather, the startups can look at as I mentioned, an IP generation platform. So then what actually happens is that you are not only generating IP assets, you are bringing a lot more options to the startups. For example, the discussions around IP out licensing or collaboration, strategic partnerships, all those things those discussions can happen much early on in a startup journey, if they externalize some of their activities.
Great, sir. You also answered my follow-up question about who owns the IP.
Yeah.
So that is great for any startup to know,
Right.
that it would be with them and not with the CRDMO.
Yeah.
That is something very advantageous for a startup as well. Yes, sir. Great. About the ability of a startup to raise funds, or if I have to coin a term, like fundability of a startup.
Yeah.
How does ultimately a CRDMO's association with a startup influence the fundability of a startup?
Yeah. Fundability is all about, if you look at, there are three fundamental aspects of fundability. It is credibility, clarity, and execution velocity. In all these three areas, the externalization can help. Credibility by generating defensible data sets, which can be validated, and clarity by bringing in more milestone achievements, and execution velocity by leveraging their well-oiled execution engine. While scientific brilliance or the idea itself is important, investors often look at startups with very disciplined capital deployment and execution excellence. That's what I mentioned about the execution velocity. And when it combined with execution excellence, this is a very good combination what investors look for.
Right, sir. It's like I was telling you earlier, it's a great perspective shift for myself. Even in a lot of day-to-day stuff, I feel instead of getting it done, it will be better if I do it.
Yeah.
But then this conversation in a whole is giving me a new perspective where if it is not done by, the startup itself or the core team itself, it can always be outsourced and done, achieved faster. It is a great learning for me.
Yeah, actually, it's very important. Thanks for touching upon this, Abhishek, because, to get into an outsourcing mindset for a startup organization is not that easy. Lot of mindset shift is required. For example, the dominant questions a startup should ask is that whether we should outsource, why we should outsource, what are the advantages we are going to get. Those are not the strategic questions one should ask. The question should be how I can, if I'm a founder, how I can architecture my execution engine to leverage the the externalization, the benefits of externalization. These are the questions, or build the startup in such a way that the architecture itself is around externalization rather than building by itself. That mindset shift is what required in the early stages of a startup, and it is absolutely required at the early stages itself, because as you know, the culture you create when you are small will continue when you are big as well. So thanks for asking that very interesting question on the startup mindset requirement.
Right. So that was fantastically how you put it across. It's very fascinating, sir, that how much externalization can help you achieve. It's really fascinating. So as we are coming towards the end or close of this perspective shifting episode, do you have any advice or a closing remark for our listening startup founders?
Since we have touched upon the risk associated with the externalization many times in this conversation, let me emphasize or let me reiterate that the biggest risk is in the outsourcing itself. It is doing the right science too slowly or doing the wrong science very expensively. So the startups that will win in the long run are those who are agile, data-driven, and deploy their capital very efficiently. So in fact, a strategic partnership with a right CRDMO is in fact a bridge between a promising idea and a fundable or investable or a scalable company. This is what I can say as a concluding remark.
Fantastic, sir. This is really, refreshing and, bringing a lot of new perspective to myself. And your closing remark is so special. I'm going to take that away with me. I think a lot of our listeners are also going to take that away with them. Thank you very much for, spending your time with us and helping us understand a lot about CRDMOs and how they could allow startups to grow faster and do much better than they actually plan to do, and how their trajectory could be different altogether.
Yeah.
It was really great having you here with us. Really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Science will always carry risk, but the right strategy keeps founders moving with clarity and control. With disciplined execution and focused validation, science-led startups can build fundable proof without overbuilding too early. If you're building a science-led startup, the question isn't whether to de-risk, it's how early. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and tell us what you think in the comments.